Morning everyone, it's Roz here from Brumby Horse Life, and it's -1 degrees this morning, foggy, and it's time to get breakfast started. Well, it's a very foggy morning again. The mist is very heavy. Reminded me of when I was walking around thinking about it, of a strange encounter I had a number of years ago when I was walking around the area. Many years ago, I used to go for a walk around the area here, and in the early hours, usually around about 6 o'clock in the morning, just for exercise. Anyway, this one particular morning, I got up and had my first cup of coffee, and Eli, our German Shepherd, was barking hysterically, and at first I thought, oh, it's a fox, or he's just being silly, that there's something in the area, but nothing that I thought might be harmful. So anyway, I decided to leave him home and just took my torch and thought I'd just go up and walk around the oval. Anyway, Eli just wouldn't stop, and I could hear him, and the further I walked away from him, down towards the oval, the more upset he became, which I was feeling that's odd. Now, I couldn't see hardly anything in front of me, even with the torchlight, because like you see here this morning, the mist was thick and foggy. But, there wasn't much sound around. The air was still, and so I thought I'd just continue on my way. So I got to the edge of the oval, and, when you think it's your spidey senses, I got this creepy crawly feeling. So I stopped for a minute to try and scan my torch around the oval to see if I could see anything before I stepped off into the dark to do a walk around there. Anyway, this huge roar came out across the oval, and it came from a little bit of a distance, but it sounded like a cross between an angry bull and a roaring lion. The lung capacity on it, whatever was roaring, was so powerful that it reverberated right up into my chest, and every hair on my body, my neck, my arms stood up, and I felt like something had just actually roared through my own body, if you physically can have that happen to you. And I stopped, and I got the chills. I could hear Eli going absolutely insane in the background, barking, and again this thing roared. It did it like 3 times and stopped me in my tracks. I was too scared to walk even one step forward onto the oval, because I couldn't see what it was that was roaring at me, and it was from a distance, but I wasn't going to walk in that vicinity. So I quickly turned around and walked home as fast as I could, and didn't dare go back out until it was light. Now, I don't know what it was. I can't say it was a Bigfoot or a Yowie, but it was no animal that I'd ever heard in the bush. And I've been raised in the country. I've lived in the Australian Outback. I've lived in the wheat belt. I've lived in the thick forest. I know all the sounds of the animals in Australia because you grow up with them, and like you hear here every day, there's all kinds of different sounds that we hear. But I had never heard anything roar like that, as loud as it did, to have that sound actually reverberate into my chest, like I did that day, and I've never heard it since. Anyway, after I got over my initial fright and fear, I decided later to go, when it was light, and walk in the direction of where I'd heard that roaring sound from. And there's no cattle in our area, it's only sheep, and sheep don't make roaring sounds like that. We don't have big cats or anything else, or lions that can roar like that. So, a lot of stuff can be eliminated. Anyway, I walked across the oval and across the train tracks and down the side of the train track to this back area. And it was like spring, so the ground was really muddy and wet. So if you were walking around, anyone who's walking in the fresh rain and muddy area is going to leave an imprint, whether it's a boot or a foot. So I was looking for tracks, because that's another thing, you get used to seeing animal tracks, so you have a fairly good idea what's come through. And to my surprise and amazement, there was a huge footprint up beside a fence, looking like whoever it was stepping over the fence. And I put my foot, and I'm thinking, who would have bare feet at this time of year, be walking around in the mud? And it was fresh. I could see that the pressure down on the ground was quite deep. So whoever it was had a foot that was probably maybe 15 or 16 inches. The imprint into the ground went down a good ½ inch. So it was a fresh track, and then on the other side there was reeds, so I could see where whoever it was had stepped over easily that fence, which was probably about 4 foot high, and had continued on down the back track behind a couple of properties where there were chickens and turkeys and things. Anyway, I took a couple of photos. Not that day, a couple of days later, where the imprint was starting to fade out. So it was a bit late, because that day I went down to have a look, I didn't have a camera or anything on me, and I wish I did now, because when I did take the photos, I did put them up online to a Yowie group. So in Australia we call Bigfoot Yowie, and I know they exist because prior to that, about maybe 15 years beforehand, we had Kel had an encounter in the southwest of Western Australia of a Yowie. So in Kel's encounter, we were living in Donnybrook, which is in the southwest of Western Australia, many years ago, and this one particular morning he'd driven out to the back of Donnybrook to the local tip, because they had a second-hand scrap metal sort of area, and in that area he would find bits of fencing and things that, was always handy to have home when we were building stuff. It's always good to recycle if you can. Anyway, he was on his way home this one particular day, and he'd just not far come round the bend. He was heading back in towards town, and it was on a hill, and then the road cuts through, and then it goes down into a valley. And as he was coming down that road, what he thought was an orangutan came running down one side of the hill, leapt over the fence, ran across the road. There was another car coming in the other direction, ran across probably 50 yards from his car, and ran down the embankment, jumped over the fence, and continued to run down. And he was so shocked and so amazed. He said it was not big, it was probably about 5 foot tall. It looked like an orangutan on 2 legs, but it didn't run like an orangutan. It had orangey fur, very athletic, and as it got towards the trees, it was using its arms to propel itself down into the deep bush. And he said as the car, who was coming in the opposite direction, they were both acknowledged each other with their jaws dropping and their eyes wide open. They didn't stop, but they were both pointing at, did you see that? And so anyway, he got home and he was absolutely shocked, and he said, I just saw a human-like orangutan running down through the bush. Now, Kel's Native American. He comes from Canada, and I'd never spoken to him about Yowies or Bigfoot over here, so he certainly wasn't expecting it, and he certainly wasn't looking for a Bigfoot type creature. So I believe in Australia there is different types and different sizes, and I think the one that Kelly had seen is quite typical to some regions in Western Australia, because there's been similar sightings closer up to Perth, up in the Darling Ranges there. So it'll be interesting if anybody else has had encounters like that in the outskirts of Donnybrook, in that thick forest region. If you've got any comments or you've had other sightings, please let us know, because I think it's really interesting. And it was the first time that we really acknowledged that there's more out in the wilderness and in the bushland that we like to think about.